Picture it. Giant rusted hulls beached on the sand. You show up in a hard hat, point at a tanker the size of a city block, and somehow that turns into cash. Guys with torches show up, cut it into pieces, and money falls out the other end. That's the picture in your head? Here's the problem. You're not running a scrapyard. You're running a floating commodities trading desk that happens to involve the most dangerous manual labor job on the planet. And the ship itself is the least valuable thing you own on day one. Here's the actual reframe, and it's the thing that makes or breaks everyone who gets into this business. You think you're buying a ship. You're actually buying a claim on roughly 8,000 to 15,000 tons of steel, wrapped in several hundred tons of asbestos, PCBs, heavy fuel oil sludge, and lead paint. And your entire profit margin depends on the 6-week gap between the day you buy that claim and the day international steel prices decide to move against you.
The ship isn't the product. The ship is a raw material contract with legs. And if you don't understand that distinction on day one, you will lose money on your very first vessel and not understand why. Let's talk about what it actually costs to get into this. A serious ship recycling yard, the kind that can legally process a Panamax bulk carrier or a mid-sized tanker, needs beachfront or dry dock access. And that alone puts you in a short list of geographies: Alang in India, Chittagong in Bangladesh, Gadani in Pakistan, or a handful of dry dock operations in Turkey and the EU. Leasing or building out a plot at a place like Alang runs anywhere from $200,000 to $1.2 million, depending on shore gradient, existing infrastructure, and whether the plot already has a cutting platform and winches installed. That's before you buy a single ship. Then there's licensing, and this is where people get blindsided. Under the Hong Kong Convention and increasingly strict EU ship recycling regulation compliance requirements, getting certified to legally dismantle vessels, not the informal beaching and torching operation, the real, insurable, internationally compliant version, costs somewhere between $80,000 and $300,000 in permits, hazardous waste handling certification, and third-party audits. Skip this step, and you can still operate, plenty of yards do, but you get locked out of the higher-value ships from reputable shipping lines who won't sell to uncertified yards anymore because of liability exposure. You end up bidding only on the scraps nobody else wants, and that kills your margins before you've even started. Add staffing. A working yard needs anywhere from 200 to 2,000 laborers depending on scale. And even at rock-bottom South Asian wage rates of $6 to $12 a day per worker, a mid-size operation running 500 workers is burning $60,000 to $180,000 a month in labor alone before a single ship arrives. Then there's your working capital cushion. And this is the mistake that kills first-time buyers more than anything else. You need 6 to 9 months of operating cash sitting in reserve, because the gap between buying a vessel and fully liquidating its scrap steel, machinery, and fittings can run 4 to 6 months per ship. People come in thinking they'll flip one ship, pocket the profit, and roll it into the next purchase. Then the market dips 2% on Turkish rebar prices in month 3, and suddenly they're sitting on a half-cut hull with no cash to pay the crew finishing the job. That's not a rare event. That's basically every second year in this industry. Now here's the two-number comparison. And this is the part that actually explains the business. Picture two vessels sitting side by side at auction. One is a retired 300-meter container ship, the kind that makes headlines, sold for $18 million new 25 years ago. The other is a scrappy little 15,000-ton coastal bulk carrier nobody's heard of. On the surface, the container ship looks like the obvious buy. Bigger asset, more prestige, more total steel. But walk the actual math. That container ship is loaded with composite materials, aluminum superstructure sections that require separate, more expensive processing, miles of wiring with mixed metal contamination that tanks your scrap grade, and refrigerated cargo systems packed with ozone-depleting refrigerants that cost money to dispose of rather than generate revenue. Your net recovery on that ship, after processing costs, might land around $310 per light displacement ton. The little bulk carrier, meanwhile, is almost entirely plate steel and structural steel, the cleanest, highest-grade scrap there is, easy to cut, easy to sort, easy to sell straight to a local re-rolling mill with almost no processing overhead.
Net recovery on that same tonnage basis, $460 to $500 per light displacement ton. The unglamorous little bulk carrier is worth 40 to 50% more per ton than the flashy container ship. This is the entire hidden logic of the ship graveyard business. It's not about buying the biggest, most impressive vessel on the auction list. It's about buying clean steel tonnage with minimal contamination and minimal processing complexity. Every experienced buyer in Alang knows this. Every rookie learns it the hard way, usually on ship number 1. So let's follow the actual dollar. Say you buy a mid-sized bulk carrier for $4.5 million, roughly $400 per light displacement ton on an 11,000 LDT vessel. That $4.5 million is your entire revenue base once you process and sell everything inside it. So let's follow where it goes. Steel plate and structural steel makes up the bulk of the recovery, and after cutting, sorting, and transport to the re-rolling mill, you'll net around $3.15 million from steel alone. That's about 70% of total value. Machinery and equipment resale, engines, generators, navigation electronics, anchor chains, all of it has a secondary market, brings in another $450,000, roughly 10%. Non-ferrous metals like copper wiring and brass fittings, which fetch a much higher per-pound price than steel, add another $270,000, about 6%. Now subtract what it actually costs to extract all that value. Labor to cut and process the vessel runs about $380,000 for a ship this size across the full 4 to 6 month timeline. That's roughly 8.4% of total recovery. Hazardous waste removal and disposal. Asbestos insulation, PCB contaminated cabling, oily bilge water, lead paint scraping costs another $210,000, about 4.7%. And this is the line item that keeps rising every year as environmental regulation tightens. Fuel, equipment maintenance, and cutting gas for the torches runs $95,000. Transport and logistics to move sorted scrap off-site to buyers adds $140,000. Insurance, which you cannot skip in this industry given how often people are seriously injured or killed on these sites, runs $65,000 for the project. Add administrative overhead, permits renewal, and site management at $110,000. Total costs, roughly $1 million against $4.5 million in gross recovery value. After subtracting your original $4.5 million purchase price from your $4.5 million in gross recovery, because remember, the price you paid the ship owner already represented the market's estimate of that recovery value, your actual profit comes from the spread between what you paid and what you're able to extract efficiently. On a well-run operation, that spread typically lands you a net margin of 12 to 18% of the purchase price. On this ship, that's somewhere around $540,000 to $810,000 in real profit. Not 18% of nothing, 18% of $4.5 million. And that's the number that actually lands in your pocket. Now, the hidden trap, and this one is specific to the ship graveyard business in a way that doesn't show up in generic small business warnings. The single biggest way this business quietly fails isn't a bad ship purchase. It's steel price exposure over the processing window. You buy a vessel based on today's scrap steel price, but you don't fully liquidate that steel for 4 to 6 months, sometimes longer on larger vessels. If Turkish or Indian rebar prices, which set the benchmark for recycled ship steel, drop even 8 to 10% during your processing window, which happens more often than people think, steel is a genuinely volatile commodity tied to Chinese construction demand and global shipping rates. Your entire profit margin can evaporate before you've sold your last ton. This isn't a rare tail risk. It's happened industry-wide multiple times in the last 15 years, most brutally in 2015 and again in 2020. When yards that had paid top dollar for vessels months earlier were forced to sell scrap at a loss just to keep cash flowing and pay their workforce. The businesses that survive this aren't the ones who avoid the risk entirely, because you can't. You're structurally exposed to it every single time you buy a ship. The businesses that survive are the ones who hedge, who stagger their purchases so they're never fully exposed to one price window, and who keep enough of that working capital cushion we talked about earlier to ride out a bad quarter without being forced to sell at the worst possible moment.
The yards that don't do this end up in a death spiral, forced to sell low, which means less cash for the next purchase, which means buying lower quality ships with worse margins, which means less cash again. Let's look at the same revenue picture run two different ways, because this is where you really see what separates a yard that survives from one that doesn't. Take a yard processing $15 million in annual ship purchases, a realistic mid-size operation running 4 to 5 vessels a year.
Run unoptimized. Labor costs balloon to 14% of revenue because of poor crew scheduling and idle time between ships. Hazardous waste disposal runs 7% because the yard isn't sorting waste efficiently and pays premium disposal rates. Insurance and legal costs sit at 3%, but add in accident-related shutdowns and fines from environmental violations, another 4% evaporates in unplanned costs. And steel price timing losses from holding inventory too long during price dips cost another 6%. Total cost drag, 34%. Net margin on that $15 million? Roughly $960,000, about 6.4%. Now run it optimized. Labor costs held to 8.5% through disciplined crew scheduling and cross-training workers across multiple cutting stations. Hazardous waste disposal down to 4.5% through proper on-site sorting and bulk contracts with certified disposal firms. Insurance and safety compliance at 2.8%, with 0 major shutdown incidents because safety protocols are actually followed. Steel price exposure managed through staggered purchasing and forward contracts with mills, holding that loss to under 2%. Total cost drag, 17.8%. Net margin on that same $15 million? About $2.28 million, close to 15.2%. Same revenue, same industry, same geography. The optimized operation makes 2.5 times more profit than the unoptimized one. And the difference isn't some secret trick. It's operational discipline, applied relentlessly on every single line item. Zoom out, because this industry is changing fast in ways most people outside it don't see coming. Global shipping fleets are aging rapidly right now. A huge wave of vessels built during the shipping boom of the early 2000s are hitting their 25 to 30-year retirement window over the next decade, which means an unusually large supply of end-of-life ships is about to hit the market. At the same time, the Hong Kong Convention on Ship Recycling officially entered into force in 2025, and it's tightening the screws on informal beaching yard operations across South Asia. Yards that can't meet the new environmental and safety standards are being cut out of contracts with major shipping lines, who increasingly face reputational and legal pressure to only sell to certified recyclers. That's consolidating the industry toward fewer, larger, better capitalized yards, and it's pushing average recycling prices up because certified capacity is more scarce than uncertified capacity. On top of that, steel demand from green infrastructure and construction in India and Southeast Asia is climbing, which supports higher scrap steel prices long-term, even as the supply of retiring ships increases. The businesses positioned to benefit aren't the cheapest, least regulated operations anymore. They're the ones who spent the money early to get properly certified and can now command premium contracts from shipping lines that have nowhere else compliant to sell. So here's the real answer to what you're actually buying when you buy into this business. It was never the ship. It was never even really the steel, not exactly. What you're actually buying is a license to convert a rapidly retiring global asset class into a commodity, on a timeline where speed, discipline, and price risk management separate the operations that compound wealth over a decade from the ones that get wiped out by a single bad steel price cycle. The real asset here is operational precision under commodity volatility, dressed up as a scrapyard. It's not romantic. It's not what the picture in your head looked like at the start of this video. But it's real. It's profitable when it's run right. And it's one of the few businesses in the world where global macro trends, aging fleets, tightening regulation, rising scrap demand are all currently pointing in the same direction at once. Does that mean you should go buy a beach in Gadani and start bidding on tankers? Depends on 3 things. Whether you have the capital reserves to survive a bad steel quarter without panic selling, whether you're willing to spend the money up front on real environmental certification instead of cutting corners that eventually cut you out of the best contracts. And whether you actually have the operational discipline to run labor, waste handling, and logistics like a tight commodities business instead of a construction site.
Get those three things right, and this is one of the more resilient, quietly lucrative industries most people never think to look at twice.
Get them wrong, and you'll learn the hard way why so many yards in this business don't make it past their third vessel. If you made it this far, you're clearly the kind of person who actually wants to understand how these industries work underneath the surface, not just watch big numbers scroll by. So it'd genuinely help the channel if you hit subscribe before you go.